Hi everyone, my name is Jackie Berknes-Gartman. I'm a GI and liver pathologist at Johns Hopkins, and today I'm going to be going over a case of a Brunner gland hamartoma and briefly talking about the differential diagnosis for this lesion. So going to very low magnification, we can see that this is a polypoid lesion, so it has kind of a rounded configuration to it. It was a fairly big lesion. In fact, this was big enough that the grocers were able to identify the margin over here and were able to ink that for us. And we can see that we have some villiform architecture at the surface, which is what we would expect in the small bowel. But the majority of this lesion seems to be comprised of these small glands that are located in the submucosa. So we're going to go to higher magnification and look at each of these components. So first, we're going to start with the surface epithelium over here. And as I mentioned, at low magnification, this has a villiform configuration to it, meaning finger-like projections, and that's what we'd expect in the small bowel. I will say that this does look somewhat abnormal in that the small bowel is normally lined by a combination of enterocytes and goblet cells. And here instead I see gastric foveolar type epithelium where we have these nuclei at the bottom, we have apical mucin vacuoles, so it looks like the surface of the stomach. So this is an example of gastric foveolar metaplasia, and it's just a change that can occur with chronic injury. And you could kind of imagine that if you have this large polypoid lesion that's kind of sticking up above the surface in the duodenum, it could get injured. And that's what I think happened here. So I think this is all essentially just secondary changes. So as I mentioned, the bulk of this tumor appears to be located in the submucosa, underneath of the mucosa. And when we go to higher magnification, we can see that the majority of this lesion is comprised of these benign-appearing Brunner's glands. So Brunner's glands normally will just be located right below the mucosal surface. They serve to make bicarbonate, which neutralizes the stomach acid. And they have this characteristic appearance where they have these rounded to flattened nuclei that all sit at the bottoms of the glands. And then we have this these cuboidal appearing cells that have amphiphilic cytoplasm. And this pattern basically just repeats itself throughout the lesion where we have all of these Brunner's glands in here. And I don't really see any atypia, so the nuclei look fairly similar one cell to the next. They have open chromatin. I can see their nucleoli. They don't look too dark or hyperchromatic. I don't really see any mitotic activity in here. So benign appearing proliferation of Brunner's glands. And the other thing I'd like to point out, going back to low magnification, is how this has kind of a lobulated configuration to it. And by that, what I mean is that I can easily draw circles around these proliferations of Brunner's glands. And in between these lobular proliferations, we can see that there's some smooth muscle in between here. So that would not normally be found in the submucosa. So putting this all together, this is best classified as a hamartoma. We'll remember that a hamartoma means that you have normal elements, but they're arranged in an abnormal way. So in this case, we have Brunner's glands, which belong in this area, and they look like normal Brunner's glands, but they shouldn't normally be forming this nodular configuration. And then we also have this benign appearing smooth muscle that's forming part of this lesion. So this is classic of it for a Brunner gland hamartoma. There are two different types of Brunner gland lesions that would enter our differential diagnosis with this. Another one is Brunner gland adenoma, which is a typically benign neoplasm. The difference between a Brunner gland hamartoma and a Brunner gland adenoma is that a Brunner gland adenoma typically will not have these bands of smooth muscle that are going through it. And it may have some degree of atypia, but even when it has that, unless it's severe, you don't typically expect that to progress to cancer, for instance. So essentially, whether we were to call this a Brunner gland hamartoma, which is what I think it is, or a Brunner gland adenoma, regardless, we would expect that this would behave in a benign manner. And sometimes people will just call these Brunner gland polyp or Brunner gland proliferation and give that differential, which is totally fine given that we expect indolent behavior. One other thing we could consider would be simply Brunner gland hyperplasia, which is something we can see as a reactive change, for instance, in the setting of peptic injury. So we did mention that this looked injured because we have this gastric foveolar metaplasia at the surface here, but this is a bit much for just gastric uh, or sorry, for Brunner gland hyperplasia, because it's forming this fairly large nodular proliferation. So I still think that this is best for a Brunner gland hamartoma. So that was our very brief tour of Brunner gland lesions and our differential diagnosis that we think about. Thank you for listening.